Have you ever loved someone you were never supposed to love? It began on a gray morning in early spring, when the river behind the old Prescott house was still half frozen, and the world seemed caught between seasons. The woman who stepped out of the taxi that day wasn't anyone remarkable, at least not at first glance. A worn leather suitcase in one hand, a letter in the other, and that look of quiet determination people wear when they've already lost something they'll never get back. Her name was Clara. She had come to care for someone else's child, not to change her own life. The Prescott estate loomed over the valley, an old Georgian house framed by bare trees. To most it looked peaceful, even beautiful, but to Clara it felt like the kind of beauty that hides its secrets beneath the floorboards. The windows were dark, the air cold, and the silence too perfect. She was met at the door by a woman with eyes sharp as glass, Mrs. Langford, the housekeeper. She had been there for decades and seemed part of the house itself, with that same air of something polished, distant, and slightly cracked. "Mr. Prescott will see you shortly," she said, leading Clara down a hall lined with portraits. All men, all stern, all looking in the same direction as though watching the same invisible thing just beyond the frame. The interview was brief. Mr. Prescott Daniel was a man in his late 30s, tall with a kind of quiet gravity that made the room feel smaller. His wife had died the year before, car accident. Their daughter Lily was 6 and had stopped speaking after the funeral. He needed someone who could reach her, someone patient, someone who understood silence. Clara did. She'd lost her younger brother when she was Lily's age. She knew what it meant to be haunted by absence. "Can you start tomorrow?" he asked. Clara nodded, unaware that this simple answer would tie her to the house, to the man, and to the tragedy that still breathed inside its walls. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the house unfolded like a clock with one slow, aching tick. Morning tea at 7, lessons in the garden if the weather held, dinner in the East Room, where only 2 plates were ever set. Daniel Prescott kept to himself, spending long hours in his study, though Clara often caught glimpses of him standing in the doorway, watching his daughter play, a glass of whiskey turning gold in the light. At first, Lily avoided her. The little girl spent hours drawing in silence, her small hands moving quickly across the paper, filling it with images of birds, windows, and a woman in a long dress standing by a lake. Always the same woman, always the same lake. One afternoon, Clara asked softly, "Who is she?" "Sweetheart." Lily didn't look up. "She watches us." The words lingered in the air, thin and cold. Clara tried to smile, but the unease stayed with her long after. Then came the night she heard the piano. It was past midnight. The house was dark except for the flicker of the old fireplace. A faint melody drifted through the hall, a slow, sorrowful tune played on the grand piano in the music room. Clara hesitated before opening the door, expecting to find Daniel, but the room was empty. The keys moved slightly, just enough to make her doubt her own eyes. She never told anyone. The next morning, Daniel mentioned that his late wife, Eleanor, had been a pianist. "She used to fill the house with music," he said quietly. "Now it feels like the walls are waiting for her to start again." The way he spoke her name, Lona, made Clara's chest tighten. There was tenderness, yes, but also something else. Guilt, maybe, regret. And then, little by little, the distance between Clara and Daniel began to close. It started with small things, a shared smile when Lily laughed for the first time in months, a conversation by the fire that lasted too long. He asked about her life before this, but she never said much. She'd been running from a life she didn't want to remember, and he didn't press. There was one evening, though, when the world outside was roaring with rain, and the electricity flickered out. They sat together in the dark dining room, the air heavy with the scent of old oak and candle smoke. Daniel poured her a glass of wine and said, "It's strange, isn't it, how someone can walk into your life when you've stopped expecting anything new?" Clara met his eyes, and for a long time neither of them spoke. After that night, the atmosphere in the house began to change. The silence no longer felt suffocating. Lily smiled more. The light seemed warmer, but still, the shadows stayed, especially near the lake at the back of the property, where Eleanor's car had been found the night she died. The locals said she'd been driving too fast, that she'd lost control, but some whispered she hadn't been alone. Clara avoided the lake until the day Lily wandered there, barefoot and pale, her hair whipping in the wind. She stood at the edge, staring at her reflection. When Clara found her, the girl whispered, "She wants Daddy to come back." "Who does?" Clara asked, crouching beside her. "The woman in the water." That night, Clara dreamed of a figure in a white dress standing at the bottom of the lake, her hand reaching toward the surface, her face hidden in the dark water. When she woke, she found muddy footprints outside her door, small ones, leading toward Lily's room. The following weeks were a blur of unease and tenderness. Daniel began taking long walks with Clara, their conversations drifting from trivial things to deeper confessions. He told her about the arguments before Eleanor's death, the distance that had grown between them. He said he blamed himself, though he never explained why. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel showed Clara the music room. Dust hung in the air like fog. On the piano was a single sheet of music, Eleanor's handwriting. "This was the last thing she played," he said, his voice low. "I can't bring myself to move it." Clara sat at the piano and placed her fingers on the keys. Slowly, she began to play the melody she'd heard that night, the same ghostly tune. Daniel froze. "How do you know that?" "I don't," she whispered. "I just remembered it." From that moment, something unspoken began to bind them, a sense that fate, or something darker, had drawn them together. Then, one night, Daniel appeared at her door. His eyes were tired, his voice quiet. "Clara," he said, "I can't keep pretending you're just the nanny. You've brought life back into this house. Into us." She wanted to protest, to remind him that love born from loss can't survive daylight, but she couldn't. He took her hand, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as someone running from her past, but as someone who belonged somewhere. They kept it secret, at first, for Lily's sake, for the house's sake, but secrets have a way of seeping through walls. Mrs. Langford began watching them more closely. The villagers whispered, and sometimes, late at night, the piano played again, soft, distant, like a warning. It was during one of those nights that Daniel confessed something that changed everything. They were sitting by the fire when he said, "The night Eleanor died. She wasn't supposed to be driving. I was." We'd argued. I'd had too much to drink. She took the car instead. He looked at Clara as if expecting her to turn away, but she didn't. She reached out and took his hand. "You've been punishing yourself ever since," she said. He nodded. "Until you came. Until I started to believe I could feel something good again." The next morning, he asked her to marry him. It was quiet, almost hesitant. No grand gesture, no grand gesture, no ring, just a man standing in the pale morning light, asking a question he wasn't sure he deserved to ask. "Clara, will you stay? Not as Lily's nanny, as my wife." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She saw the house, the lake, the piano, the ghosts that seemed to linger in every corner. She saw Lily's face, the fragile thread of hope finally returning to her eyes. And beneath it all, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. She said yes, but that night, the rain returned. Harder this time, and when she went to check on Lily, the child's bed was empty. The window was open, the curtains billowed like pale ghosts in the storm, and from somewhere near the lake, over the roar of the wind, Clara heard the faint notes of a piano drifting through the dark. She ran down the hall, across the field, her dress soaked, her heart pounding. She reached the lake and saw Lily standing at the edge again, barefoot, motionless. The reflection in the water wasn't hers. It was a woman's, pale, beautiful, with eyes full of sorrow. And for a moment, Clara thought she saw the figure turn toward her and smile. Then Lily's small hand slipped into the water, and just as Clara screamed her name, the reflection rippled and vanished. When the ripples stilled, there was nothing but her own reflection staring back, wide-eyed, drenched, and trembling. Behind her, the piano fell silent, and somewhere in the distance, a voice whispered, almost tenderly, "She was never supposed to take your place." The rain fell harder, the lake darkened, and Clara realized for the first time that maybe she hadn't been brought here to save this family. Maybe she'd been brought here to finish what someone else started. Then, from behind her, she heard Daniel's voice, soft, broken. "Clara, what did you see?" She turned slowly, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "I don't know," she said, but deep down, she did. And in that silence between them, heavy with rain and fear, the truth began to surface, one dark note at a time. The rain didn't stop that night. It came down in sheets, cold and relentless, drumming against the lake like the heartbeat of something ancient and restless beneath the surface. Clara stood there, frozen, her breath fogging in the air as Daniel's footsteps approached from behind. The world felt suspended between seconds, that fragile pause before truth and disaster finally collide. "Clara," he said again, his voice raw, the wind nearly swallowing it. "Where's Lily?" She pointed toward the lake, words failing her. For a moment, Daniel's eyes followed her gesture, wide and disbelieving. Then he was running into the water, calling his daughter's name, thrashing through the darkness as if he could tear the truth out of the storm itself. Clara followed, the cold searing her legs, her lungs burning. Together they dragged Lily from the water's edge, her small body limp but breathing. She coughed once, water spilling from her mouth, and then cried, a sound that split the night like lightning. Relief and terror came all at once. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world still and washed clean. The air smelled of damp earth and cedar. Lily slept in her bed, pale but safe. Daniel sat beside her, unmoving, his hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. Clara watched from the doorway. There was something in his eyes now, not just exhaustion or fear, but recognition, as though something old and buried had just woken inside him. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. She said a name while she slept. Eleanor. Clara's pulse quickened. What did she say? She said, "Eleanor wants to come home." The silence that followed seemed to thicken the air. For the first time, Clara noticed how cold the room was, though the fire burned steadily. That night, Daniel left for the village to bring the doctor. Clara stayed by Lily's side. The house groaned in the wind, wood settling, the faint sound of the piano again echoing down the hall. She stood, trembling, and followed it. The music led her to the music room. The door creaked open, revealing the same grand piano bathed in moonlight. The keys pressed themselves, one after another, playing the same mournful tune. Clara whispered, "What do you want from us?" The melody stopped. Then, a single note played, low, deliberate. The lid of the piano lifted slightly, as though caught by a draft, and inside, something glinted beneath the strings. Clara reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper, water-stained and yellowed with age. It was a letter. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "Daniel," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't make you understand any other way. I know about her, about the woman who's been writing to you. I've seen the letters. I know where you meet. But it isn't her that scares me, Daniel. It's what I see in you when you talk about her. The part of you that comes alive only when you speak her name. I don't think you'll ever forgive yourself for what you've done. But I can't forgive you either." The rest of the page was smudged, unreadable except for a few final words at the bottom. "If the lake takes me, remember, it's not the water you should fear." Clara's breath caught. She looked toward the window where the lake shimmered faintly under the moonlight. The words swirled in her mind like smoke. "The woman who's been writing to you." The next morning Daniel returned. His clothes were soaked, his face pale. "The doctor's coming tonight," he said quietly. "He wants to keep Lily in bed until then." Clara hesitated. "Daniel, I found something, a letter." "In the piano." His expression hardened instantly. "What letter?" She handed it to him. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening, his fingers trembling. "I thought I'd burned them all," he muttered. "All." He nodded, exhaling shakily. "Eleanor found letters from a woman I barely knew, someone I met before her years before. She thought there was something between us, but there wasn't. She didn't believe me." Clara searched his face. "What happened to the woman?" "She left town. I never saw her again." But something in his voice, the hesitation, the way his eyes drifted to the floor told her that wasn't the whole truth. That evening, after the doctor left and Lily was sleeping peacefully, Daniel poured himself another drink. The storm had left the world damp and heavy, and the air inside the house tasted faintly of whiskey and wood smoke. "I wasn't lying to Eleanor," he said, more to the fire than to Clara. "Not about the affair. But I was lying about something else." Clara waited. "The woman who wrote to me, she wasn't the first. After she left, I kept the letters. Every one of them. Even after I married Eleanor. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted to remember who I was before I became this." He gestured to the room, to the house, to the ghosts that lived in the air. "Eleanor found them a week before she died. She confronted me. We argued. She left the next morning. They pulled her car from the lake." He looked at Clara now, his eyes glistening. "You think she's haunting us?" Clara's answer came quietly. "I think she's trying to be heard." Days passed, and with each one, the house seemed to grow heavier, as though the air itself was thickening with secrets. The piano played more often now, not just at night. Sometimes Lily hummed along, softly, as if remembering something she couldn't possibly know. And then, a new discovery. Clara was cleaning the study when she found a small locked drawer inside Daniel's desk. The key, thin and tarnished, lay forgotten beneath a stack of old ledgers. She hesitated only a moment before turning it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all from the same hand, the same delicate script as Eleanor's letter. But these weren't addressed to Daniel, they were from him. The first began innocently enough. "You don't know me, but I've seen you in the village. You remind me of someone I once knew." The next, "Eleanor thinks I'm happy. I'm not. I feel like I'm disappearing in my own home." And then, one dated 2 weeks before Eleanor's death, "Meet me by the lake. One last time. I need to see you before I end this." Clara's stomach twisted, her vision blurred. When Daniel entered the room moments later, she held up the letters. "Who was she, Daniel?" He froze, his face drained of color. "Where did you get those?" "In your desk. You said there was no affair." "There wasn't," he said quickly, but his voice cracked. "Not in the way you think." "Then what?" He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "Her name was Margaret. She was Eleanor's cousin. She came to stay with us for a few months while her husband was away. It was never supposed to happen, but it did. Eleanor found out. I ended it, I swear, but Margaret couldn't let go. She kept writing. When Eleanor found the letters, she thought I'd started it again." Clara felt the room tilt around her. "So the woman in the lake was supposed to be me." His voice was barely a whisper. "I told her I couldn't face her anymore. I told her to meet me at the lake so I could explain. But Eleanor went instead. I don't know how she found out. She never came back." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence that followed. Clara looked toward the piano, the faint outline of the lake visible through the window. "Then maybe it's not Eleanor haunting you," she said slowly. "Maybe it's her." That night, the house didn't sleep. The piano played again, louder this time, almost frantic. Lily woke screaming, her small hands clutching at the air. "She's here," she cried. "She says you lied." Daniel rushed to her, trying to calm her, but every word he spoke only made her scream harder. Clara pulled her close, whispering softly until Lily's sobs became hiccups. Then silence, and then came a sound neither of them could explain. A voice, faint, feminine, echoing down the hallway, carried by the wind. "You promised me." Daniel went pale. "It's her." He ran toward the music room, Clara following close behind. The piano was silent now, the air sharp and cold. A single candle flickered on the piano's edge, though neither of them had lit it. Daniel stepped closer. Margaret, he whispered. If you're here, please, let us go. The candle's flame flared, stretching tall and white before extinguishing itself. The room plunged into darkness. Then, from the shadows, a voice whispered so close it might have been in Clara's ear. It's not him I want. The air turned icy. The window shattered inward, sending shards across the floor. Clara stumbled back, her pulse racing. Daniel grabbed her arm, pulling her out of the room, slamming the door behind them. They stood in the hall, breathing hard. She's after me, Clara said, trembling. Why? What does she want from me? Daniel's voice broke. Maybe she thinks you've taken her place. The next day, Lily refused to speak. She sat in bed, drawing again. This time, a picture of Clara standing by the lake, with another figure behind her, dark and faceless. That evening, Clara wandered to the lake alone. The water was calm, mirror-like, reflecting the sky's bruised twilight. She knelt at the edge and whispered, "What do you want me to see?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the reflection changed. It wasn't her face anymore. It was Eleanor's eyes wide, mouth open, reaching toward her. Clara gasped and fell back. The image vanished. When she returned to the house, Daniel was waiting in the doorway, his face ashen. "Clara," he said quietly, "there's something you need to know." He handed her a faded photograph. It showed Eleanor and Margaret standing by the lake, and beside them, a third woman. Clara's breath caught. The woman looked exactly like her. Daniel's voice trembled. "That's Eleanor's older sister, your mother." The world tilted. The room seemed to vanish around her. She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. "You knew." He shook his head. "I suspected. From the moment you walked in that day, I knew there was something familiar. But I didn't want to believe it." Clara's hands shook as she stared at the photograph. The three women by the lake, smiling in a time before everything went wrong. And somewhere beyond the walls, faint but unmistakable, the piano began to play again. This time, it wasn't a warning, it was a calling. And as the last notes lingered in the air, Clara understood. She hadn't just stumbled into this story. She had come home to finish it. The music didn't stop this time. It swelled through the house, soft but insistent, curling through the corridors like a living thing. The melody had changed, no longer sorrowful, but almost tender, like a lullaby meant for a child who would never sleep again. Clara stood in the doorway of the study, her mother's face still clutched in her trembling hands. She felt as if the world had split open under her feet. The photograph burned in her palm, her mother, Eleanor, Margaret, the lake behind them, the same lake that seemed to breathe beneath the windows every night. Daniel's voice broke through the quiet. "Clara, please say something." She looked at him, really looked. The exhaustion in his eyes, the guilt that had aged him years beyond his time. And beneath all of that, a question he was too afraid to ask. "What have we done?" "How long have you known?" she whispered. "I told you I didn't." "How long?" Her voice was sharper now, rising in the hollow air. He hesitated. "Since the first week you arrived." The words hit her like cold water. He stepped closer, but she backed away. "I didn't mean to hide it. I thought maybe I was wrong. You look so much like her. I thought my mind was playing tricks. But when I found that old birth record, I knew." Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought if I said it out loud, she'd come back." The house groaned. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed on its own. Daniel turned toward the sound, his face pale. "You hear that?" But Clara didn't move. Her mother's face stared back at her from the photo, young, alive, unaware of the tragedies that would follow. Her mother had died when she was 12. That was what she'd been told. A quiet illness, a closed casket funeral she'd barely been allowed to attend. But if that was true, why was her mother in this photo with Eleanor and Margaret by a lake she'd never known existed? She felt her breath shorten. "I need to know everything." Daniel swallowed hard. "Your mother's name was Helen, right?" She nodded slowly. "She was Eleanor and Margaret's older sister. Their family owned this house long before I ever came here. When I met Eleanor, Helen had already left. No one knew where she'd gone. They said she'd run away after some scandal. When Eleanor and I married, we moved here, and she refused to talk about her sister, said she'd shamed the family. I never asked why." Clara felt her chest tighten, "But she didn't die." "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe she did. Maybe not the way they said." The fire flickered low. The walls seemed to close in. Every sound of the ticking clock, the faint rustle of the wind felt heavy with meaning. Later that night, when the house fell into uneasy silence, Clara crept back to the music room. The piano sat waiting, its black surface glimmering in the moonlight. She ran her fingers over the keys, half expecting them to move on their own. And then, without meaning to, she began to play. The notes came easily, like muscle memory she didn't know she had. The same melody that had haunted the house for weeks flowed through her hands. It felt both foreign and familiar, like remembering a dream you were certain wasn't yours. When she finished, a faint sound rose from the piano, a sigh, soft and human. And from somewhere inside, a voice whispered, "Helen." Clara's hands froze. The name pulsed in her head like a heartbeat. The next morning, Lily refused to speak again. She sat on the floor drawing pictures of the lake, of the house, of three women standing hand in hand at the water's edge. Clara leaned over her shoulder, her throat tightening. "Who are they?" Sweetheart. Lily pointed to the one in the middle. That's you. Clara tried to smile. And the others, the ones who never left. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window pane. Later, Clara searched the attic, driven by something she couldn't name. Dust coated every surface, and the smell of cedar and old paper filled the air. She found boxes of letters, diaries, photographs, years of lives folded away and forgotten. At the bottom of one trunk lay another photograph, one she'd never seen. It showed 3 little girls sitting by the lake, Eleanor, Margaret, and Helen, barefoot, smiling, their dresses smudged with dirt. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "We'll always find our way back home." Beneath it was a small, leather-bound diary. The first page bore her mother's handwriting. September 3rd. I shouldn't have come back. The house feels different now. Eleanor doesn't trust me, and Margaret watches Daniel as though she's already claimed him. The water calls at night. I can't sleep. Sometimes I dream that the lake has a heartbeat. Clara turned the pages, her hands trembling. The entries grew darker, more fragmented. Something is wrong with Margaret, she says. The lake whispers to her. She says it remembers what we've buried. Then, the final entry. If anything happens to me, don't believe what they tell you. The truth is in the water. Clara closed the diary, her pulse racing. She could feel the house breathing around her, live, aware, waiting. That evening, she confronted Daniel. My mother wrote this, she said, setting the diary on the table. She was here before any of this began. Daniel rubbed his temples. Clara, please, she said, the truth is in the water. What did she mean? I don't know. His voice cracked. Do you think I haven't spent years trying to understand what happened here? Eleanor's death, Margaret's disappearance. Now all of this, it's all connected. I know it, but I can't see how. Clara stared at him, and for the first time, she wondered if he was telling the truth. That night, she couldn't sleep. She dreamed of the lake again. This time she was standing in the water up to her knees, the surface glowing faintly beneath her. Shapes moved below, faces, hands, pieces of memory, and then, through the rippling reflection, she saw her mother's face. Find me, the reflection mouthed. Clara woke with a start. The house was silent except for the distant sound of the piano. She grabbed a lantern and stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp. The grass glittered with dew. The lake stretched before her, calm and black. She waded in, her reflection trembling in the light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, something caught her eye, a glint of metal near the shore. She reached down and pulled it free. A locket, rusted and damp, its chain tangled with reeds. Inside was a tiny photograph of a baby. On the opposite side, an inscription for my daughter, Clara. The ground seemed to vanish beneath her. The locket slipped from her fingers, falling back into the water with a faint splash. Behind her, footsteps approached. Daniel's voice, rough and distant, called her name. Clara, what are you doing? She turned toward him, her lantern casting trembling light across his face. She left this for me. My mother, she was here. Daniel. She had a child, man. Someone made her disappear. He shook his head, stepping closer. You're not making sense. She said the truth is in the water. Maybe she meant this. Maybe she meant me. The wind picked up, rippling the lake. The reflection between them twisted and warped. For an instant, Clara saw 3 figures standing behind her, Eleanor, Margaret, and Helen, faces pale and watching. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. They're not gone. Clara turned. The figures were gone. The water stilled. Daniel, she said softly, what really happened that night? He hesitated, his expression breaking. I told you, Eleanor drove into the lake. No, her voice hardened. You said you were supposed to meet Margaret there. You said Eleanor wasn't meant to be driving, but what if she wasn't the one who died? He stared at her, the blood draining from his face. Think about it, she pressed. They never showed you her body. The car was submerged for days. You said you blamed yourself, but maybe you were blaming yourself for the wrong thing. What if the woman in the water wasn't Eleanor? The silence between them was unbearable. The lake seemed to hum. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low and trembling. Clara, what are you saying? She looked back at the water, her reflection fractured into pieces. I think the wrong woman drowned. The lantern flickered, the air grew colder. From the distance, Lily's scream tore through the night. Clara ran, the lantern swinging wildly. She burst into the house to find Lily standing in the hallway, her nightdress soaked, her eyes wide and unfocused. She's back, the child whispered. She says one of you has to remember. Clara dropped to her knees, gripping Lily's shoulders. Who, sweetheart? Who's back? But Lily's gaze had shifted past her, toward the staircase. Clara turned. There, at the top of the stairs, stood a woman in a long wet dress, her hair clinging to her face, her eyes glistening with tears that didn't fall. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Daniel whispered, almost pleading, Eleanor. The woman's head tilted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was both familiar and foreign-layered, echoing as though more than one voice spoke through her. You should have told her the truth. Daniel staggered backward. No, this isn't real. But Clara knew it was. The woman wasn't just Eleanor. She wasn't just Margaret. She was all of them, the sisters, the betrayals, the grief, the bloodlines that refused to rest. The lights flickered. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and lilies. The apparition stepped down one stair, then another, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the wood. Clara's breath caught. Mother. The figure's eyes met hers on for the briefest moment. The house seemed to hold its breath. Then the figure smiled, soft and sorrowful. You finally came back. The lantern's flame sputtered out. Darkness swallowed the hall. And in that silence, somewhere between heartbeat and breath, Clara understood that she hadn't just uncovered her family's secret. She was standing inside it, and it was waking up. The darkness that fell over the house wasn't just the absence of light, it felt alive. Thick, suffocating, pulsing with the same slow rhythm as the storm clouds gathering outside. Clara couldn't move. Her lungs refused to fill. The figure at the foot of the stairs, her mother, or what remained of her, stood motionless, her face half lit by the flicker of dying embers from the hearth. The silence stretched. Then, as if the world itself exhaled, the house gave a long, low groan. Somewhere deep within its bones, a door creaked open. Daniel took a step forward. Helen. The figure's head turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the faint light like glass catching flame. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years buried and voices drowned. You let it happen, all of you. Clara's voice broke through the tremor in her chest. What do you mean? The figure looked at her now, and for the first time, Clara could see it clearly, the features she remembered from childhood photographs, softened by something both sorrowful and inhuman. You came back, the woman whispered, but you don't remember. You forgot what you saw. Clara's pulse quickened. What did I see? The woman took a slow step down. The sound of her wet dress dragging across the stairs echoed like whispers in an empty church. The night they buried me. Daniel staggered back. No, that's not. The candles in the hallway flickered violently, their flames twisting into thin spirals before extinguishing themselves. In the sudden darkness, the air changed heavier, colder, almost wet. Clara's heart pounded in her throat as she fumbled for Daniel's arm. And then the voice, her mother's, layered with others, distant yet deafening, rose from the shadows. The lake remembers what you've done. Lily began to cry. The sound snapped Clara back into motion. She ran to her daughter, pulling her close, whispering soft, trembling words. But when she looked back, the figure was gone. Only the faint trail of wet footprints remained on the stairs, fading one by one into nothing. For a long time, no one spoke. The storm outside deepened, rattling the windows. Daniel sank to his knees, face buried in his hands. I can't do this again, he whispered. Clara's voice trembled. Again, he looked up, eyes red, voice hoarse. The night Eleanor died, I thought I saw her too. Before they found the car, I saw her standing by the lake. I thought it was guilt, or grief, or madness, but maybe it was. This isn't Eleanor, Clara said softly. This is something older. The storm cracked open the sky. A flash of lightning illuminated the lake through the window briefly. Clara thought she saw shapes moving beneath the surface, shadows that rippled against the light. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by Lily's bedside, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the window frame. The girl's face was pale, but calm, her hand resting against Clara's arm. In the faint glow of the lantern, Clara noticed something under Lily's fingernails, a fine gray residue, like silt mud. Her stomach turned. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a pale mist that clung to the ground. Daniel was already awake, pacing the drawing room, a bottle of whiskey untouched beside him. His voice was low, fevered. It won't let us go. This house, the lake, it keeps pulling us back. Clara stood by the window. It's not the house, it's what's buried under it. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? She turned, her voice steady now. My mother said they buried her. Not drowned, buried. If that's true, then Eleanor's death, Margaret's disappearance, everything started before that night. Daniel's hands trembled. Clara, you're talking about digging up ghosts. She met his eyes. Maybe that's the only way to put them back to rest. They left Lily asleep and went out into the fog. The ground squelched underfoot as they crossed the garden toward the lake. The mist curled around them like breath. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the gray sky in flawless silence. Clara knelt by the shore, her reflection merging with the surface. This is where they found the car. Daniel nodded, his expression tight. Here, about 10 yards out. She touched the water, shivering as the cold bit through her skin. Do you ever think they didn't pull the right body from it? He looked at her sharply. Clara, think about it, she said. If Margaret met you here, and Eleanor followed, what if Eleanor found her first? What if one of them went into the water alive, and the other never came out? Daniel's voice broke. You think I wouldn't know my own wife's face? She didn't answer. A gust of wind swept over the lake, rippling the reflection. For a moment, Clara thought she saw it again, the three figures, faint, standing side by side beneath the surface. When she blinked, they were gone. Back inside, the air felt heavier. The house seemed darker, the corners deeper. Daniel poured himself a drink, his hands shaking so violently that the glass nearly shattered. Clara opened her mother's diary again, scanning for something, anything she might have missed. On the final page, beneath the words, "The truth is in the water," faint lines of ink had bled through from the back cover. She tilted it toward the light. Another message, almost invisible. Don't let him bury me again. Her chest tightened. She turned to Daniel. You said you buried Eleanor by the lake. He froze. What you told me once after they pulled her car out. She was buried here, not in the family plot. He nodded slowly. She wanted it that way. She said this was where she felt alive. Clara looked down at the diary. Or maybe someone else chose it for her. The realization settled like a weight in her stomach. Daniel, she said softly, we have to dig. He stared at her, horrified. No, she's calling for me. He stood, pacing. This is madness. Whatever that thing was last night, it's not your mother. It's not anyone we knew. It's what happens when grief festers, when guilt becomes. Then let's prove it, Clara said, cutting him off. Let's see who's really buried out there. The silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Daniel nodded. By nightfall, they were standing beneath a sky split by lightning. The shovel's first strike into the earth made a sound that echoed through the valley, a dull wet thud. The rain began again, soft at first, then harder, soaking through their clothes, mixing with the dirt beneath their hands. Hours passed. Mud clung to their skin. Their breath came in gasps. Finally, the shovel struck wood. Daniel froze. Stop! Clara brushed away the soil. The edge of a coffin appeared, dark and warped with age. She swallowed hard and pried it open. Inside lay a skeleton, shrouded in the remnants of silk and lace. A ring gleamed faintly on one bony hand, the same ring Daniel wore around his neck. He fell back, trembling. Eleanor. But Clara wasn't looking at the ring. She was staring at the skull. There was something wrong with it, something that didn't fit. The jawline was softer. The hair, still faintly clinging to the scalp, was darker. Clara's voice broke the silence. That's not Eleanor. Daniel looked up, eyes wide. What? She pointed. That's Margaret. The storm raged overhead, wind howling through the trees. The air felt charged, alive, as if the entire world had been waiting for this moment. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Then where's Eleanor? Clara's gaze drifted toward the lake. The water churned violently now, waves crashing against the shore, though there was no wind. Lightning flashed across the surface, and for an instant, Clara saw it, something rising from beneath, pale and human, its eyes wide open. Daniel, she whispered, she's not in the grave. He turned toward the water, his face ashen. Then she's still down there. The lake roared. The trees bent under invisible hands. Lily's scream pierced the storm from inside the house. Clara dropped the shovel and ran, her feet slipping in the mud. She burst through the doors, calling her daughter's name. The candles had all gone out. Only the piano glowed faintly in the darkness, its keys moving without touch, the melody fast and now urgent, desperate. Lily stood beside it, her small hand resting on the wood, her eyes blank and shining. She's waiting, the girl whispered. Clara knelt beside her. Who? Sweetheart. Lily's voice came out distant, not her own. The one he left behind. Behind them the door swung open, wind howling through the hall. Daniel stood there, drenched and wild-eyed. It's not over, he said. She wants me to come to her. Clara turned toward him, but before she could speak, a sharp crack split the air, a sound like wood breaking under water. The piano lid slammed shut with a force that shook the floor. The candles flared back to life. Every one of them burned with a blue flame. Lily screamed. Daniel took a step forward, reaching for Clara, but his reflection in the window didn't move. It stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on her. Clara's breath caught. Daniel, he turned slowly toward the glass. His reflection smiled. The blue flames flickered violently, casting long, trembling shadows that crawled up the walls. The air vibrated, humming with a sound that wasn't quite music, wasn't quite voice. Clara grabbed Lily and backed away. What's happening? The reflection stepped closer to the glass, pressing its palm against it. The pain rippled like water. Daniel staggered back. She's pulling me in. The lights shattered. The house plunged into darkness again, and from the reflection a pale hand reached through. Clara screamed, clutching Lily as the air around them filled with the scent of lake water and decay. Daniel stumbled forward, fighting the invisible pull. Go, he shouted. Take her and run. But Clara couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the floor. The reflection's eyes met hers, those same eyes she'd seen in the photograph, in the diary, in the water, her mother's eyes. And just before the glass gave way entirely, the reflection whispered one final word, so faint, so human it barely rose above the storm. Remember. The sound cracked the air. The window exploded inward. Water poured through, flooding the room in seconds. Clara clung to Lily, gasping, searching for Daniel, but he was gone. And as the water climbed higher, swallowing the piano, the walls, the world itself, she understood that the storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. ChatGPT said. The water was everywhere. It roared through the house with a violence that didn't seem possible, tearing at the wallpaper, swallowing the furniture, dragging the piano from its corner and smashing it against the wall. Clara fought to hold Lily above the rising flood, gasping for air as icy water bit into her skin. The storm outside and the chaos within seemed to merge into one endless sound of collapsing worlds. Daniel, she screamed, her voice breaking apart in the wind. Daniel, where are you? Only echoes answered. The reflection, the thing that had worn her mother's face, was gone. Or perhaps it was everywhere now, in the rush of the water, in the flicker of lightning crawling through the windows, in the hollow ache of her name carried through the storm. Clara stumbled through the living room, half swimming, half dragging herself along. The portraits on the walls floated by, faces smearing and dissolving in the water. Her fingers brushed something solid, the old stair banister, and she clung to it, hoisting Lily higher. "Hold on to me," she whispered, but Lily was trembling, her eyes distant. Through the chaos, a voice rose again. Not a scream this time, but a call, soft, mournful, familiar. It came from below, the cellar. Clara hesitated, water swirling at her chest. The thought of going deeper felt like suicide, but something in that voice pulled at her. It wasn't the monstrous echo of the storm or the cold whisper of the reflection. It was human. It was Daniel. She turned to Lily, brushing hair from her soaked face. "Stay with me, just a little longer." They descended. Each step was blind, each movement a fight against the current. The door to the cellar was open, the darkness beneath rippling like the mouth of a cave. Lightning flashed behind them, illuminating the black water, and in that instant, Clara saw something floating near the doorway, a single photograph, its image half washed away. The faint outline of 3 figures stood by a lake. She reached for it, but the current carried it off. The cellar was half submerged. Wooden beams jutted from the walls like ribs. Somewhere in the corner, a faint light flickered beneath the water's surface, a lantern, impossibly still, burning underwater. And beside it, Daniel, who was on his knees, the water up to his shoulders, his hands gripping the coffin they had unearthed hours before. It floated now, open, empty. His face was pale, eyes wide with something between awe and horror. "She's not gone," he murmured. "She never was." Clara waded toward him, clutching Lily close. "We have to get out." "Daniel," he looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You don't understand. It wasn't the lake that took her. It was me." The words struck through the chaos like a blade. "What are you talking about?" "I thought I could fix it," he said, voice breaking. "Eleanor found out about Margaret, about what happened that night. She wanted to leave, to take everything. I couldn't lose her, so I drove her to the lake. I told her we could talk." His voice faltered, barely audible over the thunder. "But she wouldn't stop screaming. I tried to pull her back into the car, and she slipped. The water took her, and I let it." Clara's body went still. The storm seemed to pause with her. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, rain and guilt mingling on his face. "I buried Margaret to hide what I'd done. I told everyone she'd run away. I thought if I buried one lie deep enough, the other would stay buried with it." Clara stared at him, her heart shattering and hardening all at once. "And my mother? Where does she fit into this?" He closed his eyes. "She found out. She was going to tell the police. I begged her to stay quiet for Lily's sake, for all of us, but she wouldn't listen, so I did what I thought I had to do." His voice broke completely. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop screaming." The world tilted Clara. Clara felt the water lurch beneath her. Her knees gave way, and for a moment she and Lily were both underwater, weightless and silent. The water filled her ears, muffling the storm, the guilt, the confession. She saw Daniel through the blur, still on his knees, hands over his face. And behind him, rising from the coffin's hollow, something began to move. A shape, soft and pale, unfolding like silk in the dark. Hair drifting like smoke. A face taking form, luminous and still. Her mother. Helen's eyes opened, glowing faintly in the darkness. She reached out, not toward Daniel, but toward Clara. The water stilled, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. "Remember," she whispered again, her voice calm now. "It wasn't meant for you." Clara's breath trembled. "What do you mean?" The ghost smiled faintly. "I wasn't calling for you to come back. I was calling for him to finish it." Daniel looked up, eyes wide, but his voice failed him. The lantern beneath the water flared, blinding for a second, and then every sound, the rain, the thunder, even the rush of the water, fell silent. In that silence, Clara heard it, the heartbeat, slow, steady, human, not hers. Daniel's reflection shimmered on the surface of the floodwater, but it was wrong again, too still to clear. It stood upright even as he knelt, its eyes burning with a light that wasn't his own. Helen's voice came one last time, echoing through both air and water. "He belongs to the lake." The reflection moved first. It reached down through the surface, grabbed Daniel by the wrist, and pulled. His scream broke the silence. Clara lunged forward, grabbing his arm, but the current surged between them. The reflection dragged him downward, deeper, the light of the lantern spinning wildly. For a moment, she saw both of them, Daniel above, gasping for air, and his other self below, calm, expressionless, pulling him under. "Clara," he cried, choking, "take care of her, please." His hand slipped from hers, and then he was gone. The lantern shattered. The water exploded in a burst of white light. Clara shielded Lily's eyes, clutching her tight as the world dissolved into a roar of thunder and the tearing of wood. When she opened her eyes, the water was receding. The storm was dying. The air smelled of smoke and wet earth. She stood in the ruins of the cellar, water lapping at her knees. The walls blackened and torn apart. The coffin was gone. Daniel was gone. Only the photograph floated back toward her, face up, perfectly dry. She picked it up. It wasn't the one she'd seen before. This one was new. It showed the same lake, but there were only two figures, now her mother and herself. Daniel was gone. She looked down at Lily, who was staring into the calm water that filled the cracks in the floor. Is he gone, Mama? Clara hesitated. Yes, she whispered, but maybe not forever. The girl's small fingers tightened around hers. She said the lake keeps what it loves. Clara closed her eyes. For the first time since the storm began, the house was quiet. No creaks, no whispers, no ghostly piano notes, just the soft sound of rain. She walked out into the dawn, the first light breaking through a sky washed clean. The lake shimmered in front of her, still and endless. Its surface reflected her face, Lily's, and faintly, almost imperceptibly Daniel's, standing behind them, smiling in that same quiet, broken way he used to when he thought no one was looking. Clara knelt at the edge of the water. I forgive you, she said softly, but I won't forget. The reflection faded. The water rippled once, then stilled. Lily tugged at her sleeve. Mama, can we go home now? Clara looked at the house, the place that had held their grief, their love, their ghost sand for the first time. It didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a memory finally laid to rest. Yes, she said. We can go home. They turned away from the lake. The morning light caught the water one last time, and deep below the surface something shimmered. It could have been a trick of light, or it could have been Daniel standing among the shadows watching them leave. As the wind rippled through the trees, a faint melody drifted across the shore. The piano again, soft and slow, playing the same lullaby Helen used to hum. Clara didn't look back. The sound faded with the dawn, and as the first sunbeam touched the lake, the reflection of the house, once fractured and trembling, finally disappeared, leaving behind nothing but the calm, endless blue of water that had, at last, kept its promise. The sky had never looked so clean. The storm had stripped the world bare, the dust from the trees, the shadows from the corners of the earth, even the bitterness from the air. Morning sunlight spilled across the lake like molten gold, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, everything was still. Clara stood at the edge of the water with her shoes off, toes sinking into the cool, damp earth. The lake no longer looked menacing. Its surface was glass, reflecting only sky. The reflection of the house behind her shimmered faintly, smaller now, as though it, too, was beginning to let go. Lily sat nearby, drawing shapes in the wet sand with a stick. She hummed the tune her grandmother used to play, the lullaby that had survived everything. Each note was soft, pure, rising like mist before dissolving into the morning. Clara closed her eyes, letting the sound wash through her. For the first time, the music didn't bring fear or pain. It brought memory. It brought peace. She thought of Daniel, not the man who had drowned in guilt, but the man who had once sat at the piano, teaching Lily to play, laughing when she struck the wrong key. The man who had believed, even for a short while, that love could rewrite the past. It had been days since the storm. The villagers had come, whispering about the wrecked house by the lake, shaking their heads, crossing themselves as they spoke of curses and ghosts. Clara hadn't tried to explain. How could she? What words could hold what they had seen, what they had survived? Instead, she stayed, quietly, patiently. Each day the house dried a little more. The walls still bore the stains of the flood, but the air smelled of new beginnings, of wet earth and growing things. Lily adapted faster than she did. Children always do. By the second morning she was chasing dragonflies by the garden wall, her laughter floating across the ruins like sunlight after rain. She asked about her father sometimes, but always softly, as if afraid to disturb the air around his name. Do you think he can see us? She asked one afternoon. Clara brushed her daughter's hair back, the way her mother once had. I think he's watching, she said, not from heaven or the water, but from the places where we remember him. Lily nodded as if she understood. Maybe she did. Children often understand the things adults spend a lifetime denying. That evening, as the sun sank low, Clara walked alone to the place where the earth had opened and swallowed the coffin. The ground was soft, green shoots already pushing through the mud. She knelt and placed a single white lily where Daniel's last footprints had faded. I loved you, she whispered, even when I shouldn't have, even when it hurt. The wind picked up, carrying her words across the lake. The water rippled once, catching the light, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw something, a glimmer of a silhouette, a familiar face just beneath the surface. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Clara stayed there until the stars came out. The night was gentle, filled with the sound of insects and the whisper of leaves. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once and then fell silent. When she finally rose, her knees ached, her dress clung to her legs, and she felt lighter than she had in years. She walked back to the house, the front door, swollen from the flood, stuck halfway open. She had tried closing it before, but now she left it as it was, half welcoming, half free. Inside, the piano stood upright again, its wood warped but still whole. She ran her fingers over the keys. They were cool and smooth, the ivory untouched by the storm's rage. For a moment she hesitated. Then she pressed one note. It rang through the empty house, pure and clear. She pressed another, then another. The melody came back to her slowly, like a dream she thought she'd forgotten. The lullaby, her mother's song, her daughter's voice. Lily appeared in the doorway, barefoot, holding her blanket. "You're playing it wrong," she said sleepily. Clara smiled. "Then come fix it." The girl climbed onto the bench beside her, small fingers joining hers on the keys. The two of them played together, hesitant at first, then stronger. Each note seemed to echo against the rafters, breathing warmth back into the house. And for the first time, the music didn't summon ghosts, it summoned light. By the time the song ended, the moon had risen. Its reflection stretched across the lake like a silver road leading to nowhere and everywhere at once. Clara watched it through the open door. The lake seemed smaller now, just a body of water again, no longer a mirror for guilt or sorrow. "Come on," she said softly to Lily. "Bedtime." They climbed the stairs together, their footsteps slow, deliberate. The floorboards no longer groaned like sighs, they creaked like old friends. Clara tucked Lily into the big bed under the eaves, the same bed she'd once feared to sleep in alone. "Tell me a story," Lily murmured, eyes already heavy. Clara smiled faintly. "About what?" "About before." Clara thought for a long time before she answered. "Once," she began, "there was a man who built a house beside the lake because he believed the water would bring him peace. And for a while, it did. He met someone who made the silence feel alive again, and they filled the house with music and laughter and dreams. But the lake, it doesn't keep what isn't ready to stay. It took what was built on secrets and left behind what could heal." Lily's breathing slowed, her small hand curled beneath her chin. "What happened to them?" she asked, voice drifting into sleep. "They learned," Clara whispered, "that love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go." Outside, the wind sighed through the reeds. The house at last seemed to settle. Later that night, Clara couldn't sleep. She slipped from the bed and went downstairs. The moonlight painted everything silver: the walls, the piano, the faint outlines of footprints long washed away. She stood by the open door, looking out at the water. The reflection of the moon rippled gently, soft and forgiving. In its glow, she thought she saw movement, a ripple, then the faint suggestion of two figures standing side by side, one taller, one smaller. Watching, she didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as the water calmed again, the figures dissolving back into the lake's surface. A peace she hadn't known she'd been searching for settled inside her. In the stillness, she realized something: the ghosts hadn't come to haunt her. They'd come to remind her what it means to remember, to carry someone not as a wound, but as a whisper. The next morning, the world felt different. Lighter, she brewed tea on the old stove, the scent of rosemary and lemon filling the kitchen. Lily came down, rubbing her eyes, smiling in that easy, unburdened way children have. "Can we go to the village today?" she asked. Clara nodded. "Yes, I think it's time." They left the house just as the sun crested over the water. The air shimmered with live birds darting from branch to branch, dragonflies hovering near the reeds. As they walked up the winding path that led to the main road, Clara turned once more toward the lake. The surface was perfectly still, but for a moment, she thought she heard a sound, a single note, faint but clear, like a piano key struck by unseen hands. She smiled. It didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like promise, like something ending because it had finally found its way home. Years later, people would say the house by the lake was cursed. Others would call it sacred. Some swore they could still hear music at night drifting across the water, though no one lived there anymore. But those who listened closely, really listened, would say the melody didn't sound sad. It sounded like a memory finding peace. And perhaps that's what all stories really are, echoes of love trying to be remembered. As the morning sun climbed higher, Clara and Lily walked hand in hand toward the village, their shadows stretching long behind them. The house stood quiet in the distance, the lake glittering like a secret that no longer needed to be kept. Somewhere deep beneath its surface, the last of the ghosts rested. The world moved on, and though the past would always live inside her like the faint echo of music fading into silence, Clara knew now that some stories don't end with loss, they end with understanding, because sometimes, what the water takes away, it also teaches us how to let go. And when the ripples fade, and all that's left is reflection, we're left with one quiet, lingering question. Did the lake keep their secrets or set them free?